Hi there. I'm Smita Murthy, Managing Partner at Opencliff Partners. We're a product advisory and consulting firm. We provide product advisory and enable value creation throughout the product lifecycle for tech and tech-enabled businesses. We partner with investors and boards, founders and CEOs, product leaders, and individuals, meeting them where they're at in value creation. This podcast series focuses on cross-functional perspectives on what it takes to build successful products across domains and industries. I interview leaders from various functions with whom I've worked with to build and launch great products and the lessons we learned along the way. Today, I'm excited to host Bradley Pastor. Welcome to the show, Bradley.
Hey, Smitha, good to be here and good to see you again.
Great to see you. With over 25 years of experience in sales leadership roles, Bradley has a proven track record of driving revenue growth, building high-performing teams, and implementing innovative go-to-market strategies. He has held executive positions at organizations like GuardSquare, Diligent, where we work together, and Bloomberg, where he led successful sales transformations and expansions. Through his advisory work, team-based selling, Bradley helps founder-led companies go to market. Bradley's expertise, experience, and leadership style make him a trusted leader in the industry. So excited to have you on, and it's been great reconnecting after all those years.
Absolutely.
We had some fun times when we worked at Rsam that eventually became Diligent. Before we get into all that and sales strategies and so on, let me first of all welcome you and ask you to please share a fun fact with our audience about you.
Sure. So it's people that know me know that I speak often about my family. My family informs a lot of who and what I am. So I just thought it was interesting where all of us who put ourselves out in public tend to use LinkedIn as a platform. And there's all this conversation around like, what's the type of content you should post and how you should work the algorithm and all this other stuff. My most viewed, most engaged, highest interacted post was around buying a Uni pizza oven with my son.
I read it. I read that one.
So all this brilliance, and I've written some really long ones around how to do, look at your CAC to LTV and how to do planning and my favorite formula, which is sales velocity. I write something around going to Ace Hardware with my son Jake, and that is the most engaging one. So my takeaway there is your fun facts should actually be fun, and they should be about your family, and they should be about the things you enjoy. So if you don't have a family, maybe it's your dog, maybe it's about a hobby, but those are the real connections and relationships that make people and bind us together.
Actually, that kind of reaffirms my faith in human beings as humans. We're seeing enough of people not being very human these days. So that's actually reassuring that there is some hope for us as a humanity. So thank you for sharing that fun fact, Bradley. So why don't we jump into some of the things that we want to talk about on the show? Let's start by tell me about your role when we worked together. What is it that you remember most about that interaction?
Sure. There's a lot that I remember about that interaction. So my role, I came on board at the time it was Rsam, and it was as VP of sales. So they had a CRO, and the CRO was brought in, I believe the narrative was by the board, JMI Private Equity, to sort of revamp the company. And revamping meant changing a perpetual on-prem product and licensing to something that was going to be, we'll loosely call it hosted, and to a subscription-based model. And that involved, in the short time we were there, because we were required, it involved repricing, repackaging, a lot of the product stuff, which was your side of the house, not necessarily mine. And then I believe we turned almost 75% of the sales team. And at one point in time, randomly, and I get this question in interviews and all the time, where they're like, so you do all this other stuff, but can you sell? There was, in the last year I was there for a 6-month period of time, I was the number one salesperson. And I closed, I believe, the largest SaaS deal in the company. So the answer there is yes. And, we were in Secaucus, New Jersey. Shout out to our New Jersey listeners. Yes, the Paris of New Jersey. And it was, at least for the time that we were there and together, it was a great run that ended too early. Like, I think for us at the leadership level, there was just tremendous amount of potential that if we had the opportunity to execute, I think we all felt that it could have been a contender.
Yeah, no, I so agree with that. I'll tell you what I remember about you. I remember you were always Boston based. You would come down to Secaucus, and during the in person, I just remember the energy that came with you as you walked those hallways. My office was actually very close to the entrance in that
Yes.
office, and that's what I remember most about you. And of course, we were just reminiscing about that Irish pub.
Yes.
There was a hole in the wall. I don't know why we
Like
went there so
Blackbeard or
often.
something, maybe, or I can't even remember. We'll have to look it up. We'll have to
I
do
don't
it.
think we had too many options. I think that was the only option, and it worked just fine to
Yes.
decompress after work. That's awesome. Okay, so let's talk more about. So you've been in enterprise B2B SaaS products most of your career.
Primarily, I mean, people don't like to talk about age, but I'm of that age where I predated SaaS.
Yeah,
So
so did I.
I've been selling software either in a pre-sales or sales or OEM capacity really my entire career. And it's been primarily B2B. I don't think I've ever sold B2C. And it's primarily been around areas where I'm selling a solution that displaces typically a manual process. So GRC can be done manually.
Mhm.
When I was at Guard Square, which is mobile application protection, you could have really good developers that code according to the OWASP mobile standards, right? So there's always been a thing and a thread through there. And what's that allowed me to do is to focus on what's the value we bring vis-a-vis your manual processes and your workflows, as opposed to, hey, I was employee number 2 at Gong and rode the wave, right?
Yeah, makes sense. So let's talk about that a little bit. When we work, and it can be when we work together, it can be when some other example. Tell me about a B2B enterprise SaaS product that you've sold that made that sale super easy, if that's even possible. Because direct sales are hard, and sometimes enterprise sales can be long in cycles and so on. Tell me about one instance, why it was easy, and what made it easy.
Sure. So an interesting thing was when I was at Bloomberg, it wasn't that. So the perception was, oh, you work for Bloomberg, it must be so easy, right? You just go and you're Bloomberg. Well, actually, I would say no. There's a chunk of the business, which everyone knows about and sees it if you watch, Billions and all the other things, which is the terminal and data, and people buy that because of the terminal and data. What we were selling was a regulatory compliance platform. And while it wasn't easy, what I liked about it was, and I talk about this a lot, is that the ICP was very well defined. And if you understand the ICP, then it becomes easier to understand the personas, understands, am I spending my time with the right product at the right target to the right people? And what I find, and I've written about this and talked about this a lot, is that sales failures are typically due to selling into the wrong ICP with the wrong solution. So I was sales engineer at this company that got acquired by Novell, and quite frankly, we had a really marginal product. No offense to the product, it was written in Tickle, if you remember that, way back when, TCL, and it like wasn't great. Be full stop, but it was one of the few products at that time that could do visual, sort of like Visio based parallel and serial workflow. And what it did was it took the workflow from what typically was someone like a SQL admin who would create the workflows to the end user who could visually do the workflow and then run either a serial or parallel workflow. So it wasn't a great product, right?
Yeah.
But it solved a very particular thing. So when you talk with prospects, is there a manual process that you do that the business owns? Yes or no? Yes, it is. Okay, I have something for you. And while the product had shortcomings, we narrowly focused on what we were able to do with the people we wanted to and sold a ton of it, right? And I
Yeah.
think people get worked up about, I don't have the best product, or it doesn't have this feature, or it doesn't do this. And I would argue you're selling it to the wrong people.
Yeah. Yeah. Just to pause you for a second, for our audience, ICP is ideal customer profile.
Yes.
Just in case someone's not familiar with it, it's one of the key things that we have to define. All the way from when you're building the product, or when you're even doing discovery for what's the business problem that you're trying to solve. It's that critical. And you're absolutely right. I think if you're selling the right product to the wrong ICP, then it's going to be full of friction, and it's not going to be something easy or pleasant for anyone involved. It's like a square peg in a round hole, right?
Exactly.
So, okay, great. I want to pivot a little bit to a topic that I wanted to actually discuss with you, which is direct selling, which is primarily what you do, and that for enterprise B2B enterprise, large enterprise sales. That's still a very predominant mode of selling products.
Mm-hmm.
And I've seen a lot of product-led growth and product-led sales that happens. I've seen it more predominantly with SMBs, with products that target SMBs.
Mm-hmm.
What are your thoughts on, do you think PLG will really, again, PLG, product-led growth, will that kind of start to infringe on the direct sales model for large enterprises?
I believe they're complementary, and it's not one versus the other. So I had the opportunity to hear the CEO of Calendly speak about that. And the question was asked, and he said, there's a part of our business which is always going to be people go and they sign up and they use it. And I have it, and it's free and great, right?
Mm-hmm.
But he says, but for large organizations where you need the synchronization across their calendaring systems, where you want support, where you want SLAs, when you all these other things, he goes, that's enterprise. And enterprise has a particular, to your point, has a buying motion. And they don't just want to deal with a different, whatever you want to call it, customer success or product specialist or whatever all the time. So what I like about the idea around product-led growth is back in the day, we used to do a pilot, right? So you'd roll up, and this is when I used to wear a suit and all the other stuff, right? So you'd show up and you bring your sales engineer. I used to be a sales engineer, and you set up in a conference room or something. You do a proof of concept. You do a pilot. The cost for the organization that's selling it is really high. Forget my direct costs, right? We're sending people there. We're doing all these things, and it's high risk, low return potentially. And then it's expensive for the person you're doing it with at the company, because if we're selling you, Smitha, you're pulling time out of your day. You're bringing people in. There's a lot of what I call, to your point, friction.
Yeah.
But you flip it around, you go, well, what if it was I invited you to a virtual deal room that had case studies, videos around how to get going. You were able to do single sign-in, maybe against if your company's using Google for your domain services, you can go right in there, and you're able to get a set of functionality and then correct product prompts where I want to click on this, or I want to see this other reporting feature. And okay, we'll give you 4 clicks, and then you have to pay for it. Therefore, I see where you can combine the two, where you need to have the maturity of an enterprise sale, right? So, but you're going to use all the tools. You're going to use a little bit of AI to do predictive analysis. You're going to get telemetry data. You're going to have a deal room. And I like those because you can put everything into one place, and here's where it is. And you drive those behaviors. You do a couple lunch learns online, all that stuff. And that's where you're heading. To just toss it over the fence and hope that people use it, I don't know about you, but there's tons of things I sign up for. I'm like, and
there's no engagement beyond.
There's no engagement. And I do have a couple of questions about something. And there's a product that I use today, very well-known company. And I hit one of the PLG pages and I requested more information, and it went crickets. So if you're going to do that, you really need to figure out then, how do you go ahead and engage? So I had to reach out to our AE, who is no longer the AE. I reached out to the CS person, who then sent me some help files, which really wasn't my question. and then I got bounced around and went nowhere. So there was an opportunity to upsell,
Yeah.
and it just died, right? But that's an execution issue.
Yeah. No, I love that. I think this is a very important insight and an approach. I love the idea of a virtual deal desk. I hadn't heard that one before. So that's pretty cool. Have you actually implemented a virtual deal desk in any of your roles?
I have, and it actually goes back to my roots. I worked for a company called Rsam, which was really, we were precursor to Box and all of that. And we used it pretty effectively. And then Rsam was acquired by Documentum by EMC by Dell.
Yeah.
And it was funny, even years later, we would go and I would meet with customers that we sold to, but in a different context. And a couple of them I'd see like the Rsam squishy ball or something like that. So there's one that I use a lot, it's Sangria. There's a couple different vendors out there in that space. And again, it gets, none of these are the panacea, right?
Yeah.
What they are, it's a way to, I think, streamline and bring those touch points together, where back in the day you would show up and I'd be like, hey, Smithy, here's our product information, or here's this, right?
Mm-hmm.
But this doesn't exist anymore. And if I give you a stack of paper, you're gonna be like, thank you, and just honestly to sit on your desk or dump it. You want it electronic, but electronic, I send it to you, I send it to this person, we send it here, you have to go there, you have to log in, it becomes disjointed, right?
Yeah. So I think what I'm hearing you say is through these virtual deal desk concept, and there are some vendors who provide those virtual deal desks. It's a way to streamline, almost like an omni-channel approach to selling. Is that how I should think about it?
I think it is. I mean, there's still, if you go back to how do people sell, and in the way, my belief is you sell the way that you interact with people, right? And I know that sounds sort of flip, but when I review emails, I'll often say, would you talk to someone this way, right? When you get marketing decks, again, no offense to marketing, they're typically positioning the company, which is different than selling to an individual person. So if you implement a deal room and you say, all right, that's going to solve all my problems, like it won't. You still need a multi-thread. You still need to establish a champion. You still need to, I posted on LinkedIn a couple of weeks ago around the three legs of a sales, the three legs in a sales stool, right? So it's the people that buy, the people that use, and the people that pay for it. So you still need to find those people, or you need to prove to yourself that the person I'm dealing with is or isn't all three of those. So if you can find all three of them, and usually the stats or the buying committees like 8 to 11 people, and you put them in, that's where the magic starts to happen. And the hard work becomes, how do I tailor content and feedback and information to all those people? And how do I do it in an engaging, meaningful way, so that if we do lose the deal, and keep in mind, typical industry averages here are 25% win rates. You're going to lose 3 out of 4 deals. So then how do you take that information and feed it back to the product team? And the way that you're going to be able to do that is by having and executing as near perfect as a sales cycle, so that when you come to me and we look at deals and you say, why'd we lose the deal? And I go, oh, it stalled, or, oh, no, this, or like, that doesn't help. But if you're able to go in and say, well, they had all these touch points. We had this telemetry data. We tried to do enable around here. They had this feature function we didn't have. Here's the case to business. Then you, as product owners, can then figure out, okay, do we want to invest in that, or do we not? Yeah. Or is it outside? Or I think when you and I were at Rsam, one of the things we saw was at the end, vendor risk started coming up. And that was an area that we and the founders were like, we don't sell there. We don't do it. Software companies will never buy what we do. There's no need. But there was this weird, all of a sudden, literally like a shift where that became the most important thing, right?
Absolutely. And I had actually suggested a company to partner with, and they're so huge right now. They're like pre-IPO at this point. I don't know, that would have been like amazing thing if that we could have partnered with them, because absolutely, vendor risk management and like assessing, because no enterprise is operating in a silo all by itself, right? There's all these different vendors provide. Totally get it. Actually, to pick up on the thread, you hit upon something very important, and that's a perfect segue to my next question, which was like, if a deal is stalled, 3 out of 4 deals, let's say, are lost. Why did we lose? Because, a product person's obviously going to say, so Bradley, tell me what worked, what didn't work. Let's do a win-loss analysis, because then I know how to reprioritize my roadmap,
Right.
so that we don't run into the same problem again. So it's great that, through these mechanisms, we can capture a lot of data that will make our decision making more data driven versus who screams the loudest, which, let's be honest, it's happened in the past.
Right.
So what kind of metrics, apart from the data, okay, 25% win rate, apart from that, what kind of metrics do you, as a sales leader, track when it comes to successfully selling products? What metrics are important? And then the obvious ones, obviously, revenue and retention and all of that. Are there other metrics that you care about?
Sure. So I play in this weird space where a lot of the companies I've worked for, let's be frank, if everything was going perfectly, they wouldn't hire me. And that's because like everything's going frank. I'm a revenue leader, right? So if your revenue team and everything's going wonderfully, you wouldn't hire a new revenue leader. So there's already inherent challenges in their go-to-market, usually when I show up. And so I use industry benchmarks, and there's a gajillion places to get them, right? I use those as like the guiding principle. If you're going to tell me that we're going to take a sales team that's operating at 10% win rate and somehow overnight we're going to flip it to 25%, I can show you the ways that you can play with the data to get there. Well, you just forecast less deals. Magically, you've achieved that, right? So there's ways where doing that is actually a major disservice to your organization, right? So what I tend to look for, and the metric that I use, is what I call sales velocity. And that's where you look at a combination of the number of deals, the aging of deals, in the win rate, and when you divide it all into with the average sales price. And what you get out of that formula is I get to see how are you doing relative to how you used to do. And then from there, the reason why I think that's important is Gong puts out tons of studies around deal percentage win rates based upon number of people you've contacted. They do it based upon aging. And these things I think are intuitive, but it's nice to have the data. And so if you see deals that are going over 30 days where you're only dealing with one person, the likelihood you're going to win is going to be fairly slim inside that. However, what I like about the sales velocity formula is you could go and adjust and say, if I took my deal from 100 days to 75, what would be the impact? And again, getting back to all issues inside a company tend to be viewed as sales issues, is maybe you have an issue with contracting, right? Maybe our legal team just takes forever. Maybe we have to outsource it. So every time that we get a legal agreement, one of the things we used to track at Rsam was the turn. How many days between the turn? So if you're losing a week on every contract, every turn, 3 turns of a contract are 3 weeks you've lost. And it's very easy in the abstract to look and say, oh, the sales reps aren't doing well. Well, the sales rep brought it to where it was, and now we've lost 3 weeks, right? What if you're running a proof of concept? So is there a resource constraint? So when you look at the stats, it's really easy to go, and it's like looking at bugs. Well, we have less bugs. Well, why? Well, we didn't test for those, right? Like, and I'm not being cute. You know this. There's plenty of ways where you can absolutely juice the data to make it however you want. And certainly metric on did we sell is absolutely critical. However, did we sell or hit we revenue targets, when it's viewed in the vacuum of did we ship the product? Did we have full enablement? Why did we lose the deals we did? All of those things. How can you correct it if you don't have an underlying understanding of those components? That's usually where I see a lot of organizations fail, is they view it just as a sales issue, because that's easy to do. You hire a new sales manager, you fire them. You bring in sales reps, you fire them. You move them up. You move the deck chairs, right? Meanwhile, you're not shipping product. Your pricing's convoluted. You can't get pilots out the door, yada, yada, right? And that's a challenge I think every organization has. The Oracle's, I mean, there are case studies on SAP where SAP's put companies out of business because they can't deploy and they can't do their AR. So this isn't like a
Yeah.
sub 50 million issue. It's just
Right.
bigger companies are able to hide it. Right.
Yep. Totally makes sense. I love that. You hit upon something, pricing. And I know pricing is, in my experience, over, like you, we've been in the industry a long time. It's kind of been owned in different places, in different companies, right? My most recent experience is it's co-owned between product marketing and product management in consultation with the go-to-market organization, right? Like obviously sales and marketing and all that. I've been seeing some interesting trends. Like obviously we used to have, like way back when, like, a license, a perpetual license. Oh, that even sounds ancient now. Now we have subscription-based models, but I'm starting to see more usage-based, utilization-based pricing from the front lines as a sales leader. What kind of models in pricing is resonating with buyers for like B2B SaaS products?
Sure. So Snow started with the whole sort of consumption-based pricing.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I really don't know enough about it to say, okay, does that represent a new way of pricing, a new way of going? What I have when you talk with customers, they're very concerned, and prospects, customers on the renewal and prospecting, you're pitching to them, they're very concerned about buying excess capacity, right?
Yeah.
So, and we've been trained as sellers to sell more, and that's the way you get your discount. And procurement's been trained as we want a deeper discount, and we have to understand we buy. So there's this inertia that's set up that goes against this consumption based. And I like consumption based because when I sold OEM, you might have a royalty and then there's a consumption against it. So it's a model that generally I'm very familiar with. The questions I have, and it'd be really interesting to talk to like a VC or private equity firm, is how do you model that in the beginning? So Snow wasn't that way and they became that way, right?
Mm-hmm.
So they were able to be predictive. And I heard their CRO speak about this as well. And it really, he said, we weren't that way. We got there, but we had the modeling around how we wanted to do that. And I think that there's a concern rightfully from the company that's selling. Are you leaving value on the table, right? Do we charge them enough? It's a legitimate thing, right? And then from the company that's buying, you want them to consume as much as possible. And if somehow consumption-based is viewed as a limiting factor, and you run these things where we didn't budget for that. So I haven't run through that deal cycle, and I haven't had the conversations with people to say, walk me through. How have you done this? You know what I mean?
Yeah. I think it's relatively new. I don't think a lot of people have actually successfully implemented it. The earliest thing that I've seen is in the consumption of like AI capabilities, where it's based on like the number of tokens that you use, etc. And it's a way in which you kind of put a cap on how much is used, right? Because everyone's still trying to figure out how to price this, right? So that's interesting. It's an interesting topic for me. Like you, I think it's still early days. We're seeing it. It'll be interesting to see how it evolves in the industry. Cool. Let's talk about a time when you influenced the direction of a product that resulted in, let's say, outstanding sales, better outcomes in some way. Tell me about a time that you remember.
Well, I would say, I don't know how much credit I can take for this. If I remember correctly, I'll take all the credit for it. But it was actually at Rsam. I remember we were talking about going with bundles.
Yep.
And there really came up this question where we were seeing, well, it solved for a couple different things. One, the way that we priced was confusing, and there were all these modules and then content packs and just like, come on, right? And you need this whole abacus to figure out how to price. But customers naturally led down a path of bundles. So there was a standard IT GRC bundle, a vendor risk bundle, and I forget what the third one was. And then we had the high and the low.
Yeah.
And the value, I was coming from the perspective, there's very few beaches I'll die on. One is that I will hire for core competency over product knowledge any day of the week. The other I'll die on is that candy corn isn't candy. Those are my two things. So the product knowledge one is, how can I create a structure where I can ramp people up to be as effective as possible? And usually articulating pricing is a massive stumbling point for people. And if we flip this around and you were wanting to buy something from me, or I wanted to buy something from you, and I said, how much does it cost? And you're like, right. Or you have to walk me through this gobbledygook. Like I either you lose credibility, it's too complicated, I think you're a liar, like all these things that we put on it. But if you say, well, Bradley, we have two options. We have option A and option B, and you can do a high or low on either of those. And based upon our conversation, everything we understand, I'm recommending this, and here's where you fall. You're like, oh, okay, right? And that was a singular decision we made. And I remember Mark Sardo, if you remember him, we tried it on one of his deals, and he was like, I'm not doing this. And I'm like, listen, just the psychology, do the two, let them pick. And he was like, holy shit, like it worked, right?
It was so simple. Yeah. Yeah.
And that's what people want. Like, I want to buy that. Okay. I want a discount. And Bill, the former CRO, had a great discount policy where you get 10% as a new customer, 10% for year two, 10% for year three. So if you're a year one customer, you go for 3 years, you get 30%. That's where you are. And it's just like so simple and so transparent, and people knew what it was. And when we turned so much of the salespeople, we brought new people on board, I didn't have to spend all this time enabling people on pricing, and people would be able to really quickly articulate pricing very fast. So it's like a little bit of pricing question, but the pricing drove out of product because we bundled the product, right? The pricing conversation was like, whatever, right? Like that's a secondary, but if we didn't have the bundles, so I love bundles. I think they're straightforward. It's the way that I like to buy personally. Yeah. And, who doesn't like to get like this and then get a little bit of this, and you feel like you're getting greater value, right?
Yeah. And I think just to continue on the topic of pricing, since that I seem to be stuck on that today. Most recently in a couple of my roles, with the startup that I was with, the biggest challenge we faced was, here was a product that had product-led growth, some great analyst reviews. So it was just organic growth. We had no salespeople, we had no marketing, we had nothing. And it had grown to X number of customers and Y revenue. And because the price was so low, and it was really a great product priced very low. And I was brought in as the CEO, and the two co-founders were petrified changing the price. And I said, listen, no investor will invest in us at this price point because they feel like they'll never recover the money. They'll never get the return on investment, first of all. And second, we had a case in point situation where our product was really great. We were trying to break into the mid-market and ideally towards the larger enterprise deals. Right. We ran into other issues over there. But what we realized was this mid-market customer really liked our product. And they said, hey, I like this, but I'm also looking for A, B, and C. And we did a quick turnaround in pricing. And we said, this is what your total package is going to cost. It was so low. The person said, I don't believe that you can do this.
Right. Yeah, suspect.
Right? I don't believe you can do this. And I use that to say, guys, we have to be really, really confident in the value the product is adding to solve a business problem. These are fundamentals. This doesn't change no matter what model we're operating in. Is your product adding value and saving whatever, building more efficiency, saving people's time, making them more efficient, whatever? And is someone willing to pay for it? And that's how you need to check all those boxes and then say, this is the value, the number we're attaching to it.
Right.
So, yeah. So, yeah, no, great. I want to switch over to a special topic. And I think this is a topic that any of us who's been in the industry long enough will have had at least one experience: leading in chaos. So it's a topic that way too many leaders have to deal with, right? So do you have an example where you went into, like you said, you've said you were brought in as a revenue leader or a sales leader because something was not working?
Right.
Was something not working because it was chaos? Like, how did you lead and change in that environment?
So it's a topic that, if you look at sort of revenue leaders pre-COVID, or include a little bit of COVID, where and it was during the ZIRP period of time, right? So zero interest rates period. You had a lot of sales leaders. You see a lot of them on LinkedIn, et cetera, where it was like, I did this and I did that and I grew. And you're like, okay, if someone gave my company $500 million, I'm sure I could probably do a lot of really cool events and do tons of customer acquisition, and not taking away anything from that, right? This isn't like, well, I didn't do that, so boohoo on me. But what you find is that you have a generation of leaders that did that. It looks really awesome on a resume. Yet when they go to any other company, they're incapable of leading, because it was only when it was good, right? So again, don't want to date myself here, because I think there is some reluctance at times, to hire older people. But I sold really successfully in 2008 when the economy collapsed. I was selling during 9/11. I've sold during COVID. So there's all these periods of time where, like, you step in a situation, you're like, like, I've seen it, I've done it, I can get through and I can navigate through that. And we did, I think, for a lot of go-to-market people, both on the product side, like you could ship product that wasn't really great, like it was fine. On the sales side, certainly, where you could sell really incomplete and people would buy. You did it from the CS retention side, where you could be measured on your net retention, meaning, so for people listening, so churn is how much you lose, but net retention is you could sort of outsell that churn, right, as a metric. Right. We're losing 10%, but we're upselling 15%, or we have contractual increases in our agreement every year. So it buries the churn. Yeah. Right. Yep. So there's all these things that occurred. And now you take those same group of revenue leaders and you put them in environments where you have, as you're saying, chaos, and they don't know what to do. Yep. Right. Yep. And the ability to enable and train and motivate teams doesn't exist, because we're not paying them the crazy amount of money that they were at that period of time. You don't have access to all the tools, the enablement people, and all these other things. A friend who ran enablement for a company, and they were running through cohorts of 50 new hires a quarter. I heard I forget what the name of the company, head of global enablement. They built their own sales academy. They're running through 200 new hires a quarter. Like, where does it happen anymore? Right. So when you're doing all those things, you have a different level of chaos, but the chaos is masked by velocity, right? Money solves everything. Yep. And where you and I play in and step into are these companies where, like, it's well-intentioned. There's a focus there, but the chaos is around the structure. The chaos is around being honest around the challenges that are at hand. The chaos is they were sold a bill of goods that if you just replace these one or two things, it'll solve all the problems. Mm-hmm. So what I tried to do, I'm not always successful about this, is really it's about alignment. So alignment between you and the executive team. It's when you interview, and when I've done some of my advisory work, it's having those open conversations. What's really interesting is, well, I'm not doing it right now, but when I did advisory work, people would have open and honest conversations with you that were different than if you were an actual employee.
That isn't that the well, for
You're
me,
like,
that's the best part of being an independent consultant after doing years in corporate. In
right,
corporate roles, you're bound by a certain constraint, be it like, oh, this is an expectation of me, or there's a sensitivity around something or the other. Everyone may not have an appetite to hear how it really is. Um, so yeah, no, it's the most liberating thing of being an independent consultant. Not that we're trying to be harsh, but we can actually have a very, very honest
right.
and transparent conversation.
I think it is. It's sort of like that, those comments where people say, why do people have these open, honest conversations with some stranger on the plane where you don't have with your
Yep,
friends?
exactly. Yeah.
Right.
Yep, exactly right. Awesome. Okay, so um, what's on everyone's mind today? AI, Gen AI, agentic AI. There are companies making dramatic strides. I keep tracking investor sentiment around it. Everyone like did the hype. Now they're saying, okay, this has to pay off. So, what are your thoughts on how like the AI wave is changing what you do? Does it fundamentally change how you sell, and what you sell? Tell me your thoughts about that.
And so I like AI stuff. I mean, I'm quasi technical and I like toys and tools and things like that. So, it checks the boxes for me. The way that I use it in real life, though, is a little bit different. So, for selling, I like using ChatGPT as a sounding board. So I can go in and I have a bunch of prompts that I've saved. I actually send them as a drafted email instead of note. So
Yep. Yep.
that's where I keep them. I can access them easily. And I have a couple drafts around, do some competitive analysis for me. Right.
Mm.
So I am this product against this product selling to this persona. Give me a rundown. And it just helps like frame that conversation. The
Mm.
other thing that I like doing with it is, so there's Chat PDF and Chat GBT. You can take a PDF and plop it in. I wrote something again about this on LinkedIn a few weeks ago, where I like doing it for prep for meetings. So I will go get the 10K, the annual report, press releases, all that stuff, and I'll feed it in and I'll say, I'm meeting with the new global head of product, Smith and Murphy. Give me a rundown of what she might be interested in relative to this, right?
Yeah.
And I think where people run into walls on it is their prompts aren't very good. So the prompt is like the classic explain, I don't know, whatever, like distributed architecture to me as if I'm 2 years old. Like, and they give you this, and then people take that, and then that's what they go with. Like,
Yeah.
come on, do more work on it.
Yeah.
But for prepping for meetings, love it. It's fantastic. Email authoring, I use Lavender. I use both Lavender and Grammarly. They both serve different
Cool.
problems or solve
Yeah.
different problems. And Lavender just released a sort of email like sales agent thing called Aura that I played around with that has some good promise. I did a pretty extensive evaluation of AI like SDR tools. Completely wasn't impressed by any of them.
Mm.
And I think it's the limiting factor, a little bit of the technology, the amount of, I call it how much food you have to feed the beast. So there's all of this work I need to do, getting back to the concept that sales issues are really product marketing issues. If you don't have the content from product marketing to feed the AI engine,
Yep.
it's not going to do it. Even with Lavender, and I really like Lavender. I'm not like paid by them or anything, but the Aura product needs to crawl your email to then figure out how you write. So if you're hiring a new SDR team and you give them that, like it's not good, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's where people. So where I was part of something last year, and they asked me to make go-to-market predictions for 2025, and one of them was specific to this, where I think that you could go and ramp people quicker and faster using the AI tools than historically you would have been able to do.
Mm.
And there, I still think there's immediate promise for that. You can put people in, give them a handful of prompts, a handful of places to point, and say go, and they're probably going to get better than level 100. They're probably like around 200 level in terms of being able to interact. the actual working intelligence. So I've used Gong, I've used Clear, I've used all those things. And it's like it's okay,
Yeah,
but what you want someone to tell you something you don't know. And the problem with the early LMMs with any of these things is they're going to tell you what you feed it.
absolutely. Yeah.
That's one of the challenges. That goes back to even when I was at Autonomy. Autonomy was all like machine learning and Bayesian inference and all this other stuff, but it was still largely dependent upon the model you trained it against.
Yep. Interesting. Love the fact that you're using the tooling to augment what you do and to make you more efficient. And that's the most common thing I've heard from all my guests. So great to hear that that it's actually helping what you do as well. Awesome. All right, we're almost at the top of our session, and any book recommendations you have, books that have helped you in your career or generally in life that you'd like to share with our audience.
Sure. So a couple of things that I like is there's a book called The Four Truths. I really like that. I go back and sort of pick it up every couple of years, and I would say it's called the the Four Agreements, but it's based upon the Buddhist Four Truths. And I'm Jewish, I'm not Buddhist at all, but I like just the idea around centering. It's similar to Marcus Aurelius and the Stoics, which is a bit of a heavy book. What I'm also, a book that I'm trying to read again, it's a little hard for me as a salesy person to get through, is Blue Ocean Strategy.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And that's a little bit shout out to my product friends and everything out there. But really, the idea of I'm coming out from the perspective of how do I find new revenue streams and how do I find new markets? And I find that there's some books I constantly go back and reread. Yeah. So the Four Agreements I reread every year. Blue Ocean, I'm on my second run through of it. It's a little bit hard for me to get through. I reread The Challenger Sale. I did that a few months ago. And I think what happens is look, we are all big one LLM. So the more that I interact and I go back and read those things, it provides more context. It helps build that pattern recognition inside of there. And, those are the things that I'm reading. And then for fun, randomly, my wife read it and then she handed it over to me, and it's actually a great book. It's The Wedding People.
Interesting. I'd never heard that one.
By Alison Esposh. And we listened, she had it on audio. She owned the book, but we went away skiing. We listened to the book and I was like, this is a great book. And I prefer to read it. And I was like, wow, this is pretty solid. So it's not all work and no play.
Yeah. Awesome. Awesome. That was a fabulous conversation, Bradley. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. And the intention of these podcasts is I started it to have some fun and reconnect with old colleagues and just hopefully share some lessons that our audience will appreciate, which I think they will with this conversation. So thank you again for being here, and I'll talk to you soon.
Thank you so much.